All right, episode 16 of the Department Podcast with Justin, Joe, Steve, and Jesse. So this is going to be a little bit of a different episode where normally we always, joke around and have a good time and talk about sports. But sports as a whole should always be either entertainment or a distraction from, the rest of the shit that's going on around in life. And right now, sports aren't important and the distraction of sports shouldn't be a thing. you know, as we've seen in recent days after the shooting of Jacob Blake in Wisconsin, we've seen the NBA especially, and now the MLB, and now we're starting to see it take effect in the NFL. Teams are outright
MLS.
are protesting and boycotting and not playing their games, going to practice. And as a whole, it's needed because that distraction should not be a thing to avoid a conversation that is much needed and a subject that needs attention. And quite frankly, sports don't matter right now until Black lives do. And that's kind of where this podcast is going to go. So if you don't care, don't want to listen,
Leave.
fine. If you don't,
I don't care.
if
Let's
this
do another
changes,
episode.
if this changes, your view of our podcast, subscribe. I really don't care. I don't want your view then at that point, because this is a conversation that not just us, college kids or whatever need to have. This is a conversation all of America needs to have. And this is just us, I guess, doing our part to see how it could help. But that's where it's going to go. We're not really going to talk about sports that much because, quite frankly, it's not important right now. So I don't really know where to start. I guess I'll just throw it out to you guys and kind of just see where it goes from there.
Go-
Well,
go.
here's the biggest thing right now. Is it's very important to understand that the reason why the games aren't being played is in part to force podcasts like ours and shows and people's conversations to not be about, like, is LeBron going to get his fourth ring? Is Dame going to be healthy? It's not. This is not what we have to talk about. They're not giving us the opportunity to distract ourselves with sports as entertainment right now. They're kind of forcing us to look at the issues, talk about the issues, and understand what they are. And there's no other way for them, in my opinion, to get a lot of people to take them seriously, because we see, they'll write Black Lives Matter on the court. Nothing changes. They'll take a knee for the national anthem. Nothing changes. How many ways can they try to communicate that there is a problem before, they have to just be like, we're done talking?
Yeah, for sure. And the thing that gets me is that the people who are against the NBA players boycotting this are acting like the NBA players want to boycott. They don't want to boycott. They want to play the game of basketball that they've been training their whole life to play their whole time. They need to do this, to take a stand. They have one of the biggest platforms in the world, being an athlete. So they need to take a stand on this huge platform. That's a great way to get your point across, because obviously it's not working with the words on the court. It's not working just taking a knee before the national anthem. Taking a stand and boycotting a game gets more eyes than on them than have been I can't even speak than there have been this whole time. So it's not that they want to do this, but it's just needed. It's very much needed.
And the thing is, too, they have the platform to do it, because if they don't, then who will? Because, they're in the public eye the most right now, because that's really all that's going on in sports is the NBA playoffs, the MLB season, and that's really about it. And this is their way.
NHL playoffs.
Oh, we'll get to the NHL.
Slapping,
But this is their way of shining much needed light on the subject of the social injustice that's going on in our country.
I mean, here's the thing. They have sacrificed a lot to play this sport during a global pandemic. They have taken a sacrifice to their health and, to be part of society, to bubble up and do this. And now they're being used as a distraction for issues that are affecting them. You can't support these athletes without realizing that if they're not superstar athletes, it could be them.
Yeah, they're humans first before they're athletes too.
Like the only difference between like these victims and their families and your favorite black athletes is the fact that they were great at basketball, but this could be anyone. And that's the really, really scary part. And that's what they're saying. That's what they're trying to communicate, that you can't support us as athletes without first respecting us as people.
So there was a player that was on this months ago, and his name is Kyrie Irving. And he was crucified in the media. ESPN had Adrian Wojnarowski, probably, I would argue, one of the most legit NBA reporters, one of the most respected, you know?
Yeah.
They made him write a slander article on Kyrie Irving. They walked out Kendrick Perkins and had Kendrick Perkins call Kyrie Irving, had the nerve to call him a sellout and a disruptor, and he was the problem. No, he wasn't.
No.
He was doing his job as the NBA Union Vice President, and he had these concerns. You can go back and look at the quotes. He said, basketball can be a distraction. We can't let that happen. We can't let this, break down, and we fought so hard for these social justice things. We can't just let them be taken away and be used kind of as a way to bury these things. So, first off, anybody in the media who had anything to say about Kyrie Irving's leadership or his, Kendrick Perkins said he doesn't have a working brain and, things like that, the apology needs to be as loud as the statement, if not louder. So that's the first point I think that needs to be made, is there were players who were aware of this months ago, and they got turned away. My second point of how this is bigger than basketball and how it's bigger than basketball is two players with the most on the line legacy-wise in LeBron James and Kawhi Leonard. The Lakers and Clippers both voted to boycott the rest of the season. I think we all pretty much agree here that the Clippers and Lakers are the top teams in the West and have probably, top 3 chances at the title.
Yeah, for sure.
But that doesn't matter. As, you guys said, that doesn't matter. Those championships and, team success, that doesn't matter until you respect them as human beings first and not just basketball players, not just entertainment. For all the people who want to keep politics out of sports, where have you been? Politics has always been in sports. Since the 60s, Bill Russell walked with Martin Luther King in marches. It's always been there. It's always been a thing. It's always been an outlet because in America, in the United States, most of the time, an African-American man, his best way for success is through athletics. Because that's the only thing somehow, some way that this country does not keep them down from. That's it. So that's where they make their money. That's where, if you tell somebody to shut up and dribble because that's their job and, oh, I wish I could just skip work, like they did, you are part of the problem. This is not a capitalist idea. This is not a sports idea or a politics idea. This is a moral, humanitarian issue. And if you have any type of problem with it, get out. Because we don't want you here. Like, it doesn't...
The NHL is taking you in with open arms, if that's your belief.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of the NHL, it's kind of tone deaf right now that they haven't said anything. Obviously, since they are the only sport with a very minimal group of players that are black, it's still disrespectful to those players, however many there are in the NHL. I don't know the exact number, but it's definitely under 10.
Yeah.
You know, that they, as a league as a whole, still haven't said anything, because then at that point, that's almost proving even more that the NHL and hockey is a white man's sport, and then those players are even more outsiders in their own sport, which should be their escape and where they should be accepted, in addition to their own country, even still.
Yeah, it shouldn't matter with the NHL if they have one black person in the whole league or if they have 1,000 black people in the league. It shouldn't matter. They should all do the exact same thing the other leagues are doing. If you're, like Jesse said, it's a human moral right to have. Like, it's not, it's just being a good human, and it's has nothing to do with sports or anything. And I guess the people over at NHL aren't too keen on this, which is very sad to see. I know a lot of us here aren't too keen on hockey to begin with, but still, it's a basic human knowledge to just support what's going on.
The sad part about the hockey, aspect of it is it's not like you can give them a pass, but majority of their audience is white. Yeah. Majority of their players, vast majority of their players are white. And Colin Cowherd said earlier on today in his show, what do you want your athletes to be? Do you want your athletes to be smart? Do you want your athletes to win? Do you want your athletes to talk about things? And I think with the NHL, they don't want to risk the revenue loss, because the NBA, if they push out fans, if they isolate fans, oh well, darn, I guess. They're still, I would say, unquestionably the second or third biggest, league that there is. At this point, I think they were trending more second until baseball kind of got kicked back up with the 60-game season. But the NHL already, I think, struggles with having a fan base that they don't want to isolate, and lose revenue. But again, this shouldn't be a money issue.
No.
This should not be a revenue issue. This shouldn't be worrying about, making some fans angry, because one of my favorite things that LeBron has done of all time is bring social issues to the front of the NBA, more so than any other player ever has. And I mean, if LeBron is driving you away from the game with his social issues, don't come back. Don't come back when Luka's the best player in a couple years, because if Luka if Luka's the best player in a couple years and you come back and you're like, oh, thank God it's not LeBron anymore, that's not because you don't like LeBron because of basketball. That's because you don't like LeBron because he's black and bringing social issues to the forefront of the discussion.
Yeah.
So I personally love how LeBron has isolated part of that basketball community. Good. Don't come back. The majority of the NBA is African Americans, and if you don't respect them as human beings, you have absolutely no right to watch them and be entertained by them.
And I mean, with LeBron, he's a very polarizing figure. And regardless of the critiques on the court and, his basketball abilities, anything that involves him playing the sport, put that aside. What he has done as an ambassador to be the face of a sport has been probably, in recent memory, the most impressive that display that any athlete has done.
Joe, I'll go one up. It is the most impressive of all time by far, because LeBron was put in the spotlight at 14 years old.
Yeah.
And has never messed up, blipped up once. No, I mean, think about it. Literally, when has LeBron done anything wrong off the court?
No, you're right.
Yeah. He has a school that he I mean, he's given these kids that go to the school free tuition, bikes so they can, get to school, laptops. I mean, continuous things that he puts back into his community. And that pressure to be the star of the league at 15 years old, he was being scouted. And to never falter once.
And he's been under the harshest microscope and criticism, and I'm guilty of it, as a basketball player. He has been, critiqued and critiqued and critiqued, and it has not stopped him from continuing the voice off of the court.
Yeah.
And I think that without LeBron, you wouldn't have a Kyrie, not just basketball Kyrie, but you wouldn't have outspoken Kyrie.
Well, and that's the thing.
LeBron, hear George Hill saying that we shouldn't be here right now.
That's the thing. LeBron's taken basketball, and he was able to use his platform to become one of the best humanitarians right now in the world. And Jesse, you brought up this school in Ohio. People are all fine with him, taking care of people in his community that way. But the second he still vocalizes what's wrong in his community, the black community, that's when people get pissed off, because that's why it's opposing, their thing. It's fine when he's taking care of kids, but when it's literally everyone in the age range of whatever, in his ethnic background, that's when it becomes an issue, and it shouldn't be, because at the end of the day, he's still trying to help people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he is the definition of for the people.
Yeah, he's a leader.
It's all done. He has led the charge. And what I would like to give credit, because I don't think 5-10 years ago, even 3 years ago, Major League Baseball would ever postpone a game due to a social issue like this.
I agree.
It is very, very, very impressive that we have seen Major League Baseball, pretty much the most traditionalist, old school sport, actually, take notes from the NBA and go on a game-to-game, team-to-team basis.
Yeah.
And be a part of this.
I think that also has a point of, I don't know, it just feels to me like over the past, 10, 15 years that MLB has become more diverse.
Yeah.
There, all the top players, I feel like, besides like Mike Trout, there are a lot of international players in the MLB.
So many. Central American, Asian players.
Yeah, out of like the old school sports, they've done the best with adapting to the recent times. Like, as we were comparing to the NHL, how bad they're doing. Like, baseball was an all-out white sport. It used to be an all-out white sport. And they adapted really well over time by listening to their players and being on the side of their players and understanding how they feel. So I give props to the MLB as well.
Yeah, like today alone, I'm getting notifications on my phone. 3 games at a minimum have already been postponed, and there are a few games that are still up in the air and the teams are deciding. And Joe, like you said, like if this was under Bud Selig, that wouldn't have even been an option.
No, and we can kill Manfred all you want, but this is a big step for Major League Baseball. What I did not really care for is there was the Rockies and the Cubs each had one player decide not to play, but the team went on without them. That was a little bit of a tough pill to swallow, hearing that Jason Hayward sat alone in his protest while the rest of the team decided to carry on and move forward with the game. This is the same Jason Hayward who they listened to. He rallied them during the rain delay of the famous 2016 World Series. Jason Hayward, guided them and led them to a championship by all accounts. And now his voice was ignored at, a pivotal time.
That's sad, because that just shows me right there they don't care about him as a person. They just care about him for his skills and his abilities to play the sport. That's all that shows me right there. That's just sickening. That's straight up sickening.
But then it's like you see if you saw Anthony Rizzo's quote, he's saying, fuck this, fuck that, this is bullshit type of thing, about what's going on. But then at the end of the day, he still decided to play.
I'm not it is a decision by decision thing to decide to play, but it is difficult to have, a player on your team sit out and the other 24 guys just say, okay, we're going to go forward and we're going to play. What my big problem with Anthony Rizzo's quote out there is he said that there's problems and extremes on both sides when talking about this issue. You can't both sides an argument that involves human rights.
Also, you can't both sides something when only one side is dying for bullshit reasons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
SportsCenter announced 20 minutes ago the NHL will not play any playoff games Thursday in solidarity with other leagues protesting the recent police shooting of Jacob Lick.
Makes us look dumb.
Crapping
on the NHL.
Well, I feel like this is more.
It's a copycat thing.
It's a reactionary thing more than a progressive.
Yeah,
thing.
It's like everybody else is doing it. We don't want to look like we don't want to look like the bad ones because again, they just announced 20 minutes ago. We are doing this at 3:00 in the afternoon. And this stuff was happening yesterday, 24 hours.
This literally happened yesterday. So they just decided that they weren't playing games tonight about 2.5 hours beforehand.
That's crazy.
What I would like to hear from the NBA right now, the individual players, is that despite they need to come out and say, well, I'm not going to tell them what they need to and have to do, but for them to come out and say, we are going to continue to play, but the fight doesn't stop. The conversation does not stop. The activism does not stop.
Yeah, but that's my problem with this too, is that it does stop. We saw what happened months ago with George Floyd and all that. It was the quote-unquote trendy thing to post on your story, Black Lives Matter, all this, all that. Give it to a couple months later. All this nonsense is happening again. So the conversation has to continue. It can't just stop out of nowhere. They have to – I like the boycott idea. That's the best thing going so far. But it has to be more. There has to be more that they can do, or we can do too.
And people killing the NBA players and calling them hypocrites for, saying they're going to protest the game, having a meeting with the board of governors, whatever they did yesterday, and then coming out and playing today, that's also kind of bullshit because the NBA is one of the most progressive leagues. I'm sure behind the closed doors, because we don't know what they talked about in that meeting, I'm sure the NBA is going to back the players on whatever platform they need. They're going to support them.
Yeah.
And it's the players' ultimate decision if they want to play or not. If the NBA, I'm pretty sure they gave the power to the players. If the players didn't want to play, the playoffs would be done. They wouldn't be playing.
Yeah.
They have the ears of society, of leadership, of Congress. They have the attention. And that's where it gets mixed up because you or me can't just not come. If we don't come to our jobs, no one's going to notice. We can't boycott our jobs and have it affect anything. What they have is the leverage to withhold, their services because they have something where people will listen. That's the difference. That's why you can't compare this to the average person because they have the ability to get people to listen. They have the platform, and that's what makes this just so much more impressive.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing I think that goes back to about, this being a distraction. It was some players wanted to say, well, why can't we do both? Why can't we play basketball and, social justice and all that? And that's fine. But what social justice stuff did you guys see going on during the basketball games?
I don't think that's fine.
They did one trailer thing of, related to Breonna Taylor, I think, on TNT. But that was it. I mean, they're letting them put pre-approved social justice messages on the back of their jersey. Jimmy Butler said, I don't want to put a name on the back of my jersey because I'm just an African-American man. Can I do that? And they said, no, you have to have a standard jersey. So there was another point that Coward brought up that I thought was really good earlier on in the show too. And it's, Joe said, if we boycott our jobs, most people don't have the ability to do that. They don't have the platform to do that. These players have conversations and have an ability to talk to billionaire owners and millionaire owners and everything. And while I think what the NBA originally agreed to of the 10-year, $300 million agreement to help fight social injustice and everything like that. Well, at first you hear that and you're like, wow, that's really progressive. That's good. Then you start looking at the numbers and you realize that over 10 years, $300 million is $30 million a year. And there's 30 owners. So every owner, if the owners are paying this, is putting up $1 million a year. That's a minimum player's salary.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a lot. Like 300 million, yes, that's a lot. And then you spread it out over 10 years and it gets a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
And then you spread it out amongst 30 owners and it gets a little bit smaller. And just the more you look into it, you're like, okay, they clearly want to look like they are doing, this big thing. Michael Jordan and the Jordan brand themselves are giving more money than the entire NBA as a brand. So, I mean, even if one owner was to give up $30 million that year, that's Otto Porter's contract. That's what they're paying Otto Porter. You're telling me to fight social justice issues, you are pulling all 30 owners together and asking them all to give up $1 million, just basically a bench warmer on the team.
Yeah.
It's not enough.
No.
It's not enough.
And it's unfair to ask the players to not only be these tremendous athletes, to also entertain us, to also say the right things, but then also have to be like these social leaders and become these politicians. Like, we have so badly dropped the ball with the elected public officials and where things have gone to this country that we have put these people in a position where they can't just play basketball.
No.
They have to lead and force these issues, or else no one will do anything.
So I just got a notification. The New York Giants are mulling over the idea of boycotting regular season games as well for this. And that but it goes after a much bigger audience in the NFL over the NBA.
A much more diverse audience.
I would say, yeah, the NFL still has, I mean, we've seen people turn off when kneeling was becoming a big thing. So we'll see how the NFL, responds with that.
Even between this whole time with COVID and now, the Black Lives Matter movement, is that the NFL has had the most time out of any of the leagues to come up with a way to approach both.
And they don't seem
to
know how to do it.
Kind of seems like they did the least out of everybody, too, in all
not in
categories.
They're not in touch
No.
with
Yeah.
how the players feel and what the players want.
Yeah.
Even, I would almost say, outside of baseball, the owners in the NFL are the old white,
Yes.
billionaires
Yes.
Yeah.
of like the old values.
It's a slave system, if we're being honest. It's a slave system. It's right there in front of us. I know players have come out and said that before too. They feel like they're a slave being owned by a white owner who's in charge, who has a lot of money, who is telling them what to do on the field. It's a modern day slavery. That's a Quavo and Travis song.
I think you can look. So if we take this back to, let's say, look at when COVID really hit in March and the season was suspended, right? When that happened, a couple, NBA teams, I believe, the Cavs did and the Nets did right away, are the ones that I can remember off the top of my head. They said, hey, all of our concessions workers, anybody who was working, don't worry about it. We're going to pay for your stuff, all that. And then Giannis said, oh, I'll pay for, Milwaukee's, concession workers and everything. And that's such a great thing from Giannis, but that's not his job.
No.
That's the owner, Giannis makes, let's say, $35 million a year. That's great. That sounds like so much money. That's a lot of money right there, right? Until you look at what the owners make and how much they have. And my favorite story of this time was when Zion Williamson, who's on a rookie contract, by the way, and is not making, he's making, I think, $4 or $5 million this year. He said, I want to, give $1 million to the Pelicans workers and everything like that. And the Benson family and the Pelicans owners came out and were like, oh, Zion, that's so nice. We wish we could help, but it's just a little more complicated than that.
He's a rookie.
No, it's not. It's not more complicated than that. Like, these people have more money than you could spend in lifetimes.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it goes the old saying, you don't get rich by giving away money. And I think that is pretty much the idea of all the owners in the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, all of them. It's, you don't get rich off giving away money. I'm paying you for a service, and that's what it is at the end of the day. It's a service. You entertain people, but as a man, do they respect them? And that's what these players across every single league wants.
Yeah. I think it'd be great if the first game of the season gets boycotted too. That'd get eyes on it for sure. Because everyone looks forward to that Thursday night game, having the Chiefs celebrate their championship against the Texans. But I think that even if week 1 or whatever, even if the Giants don't boycott, I think that first game just has to be boycotted. Because it's just one of the biggest games of the season. And I think it'd be beautiful, honestly. Plain and simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, don't really know how to end this because our time is kind of running out, but any last closing thoughts before we call it a wrap on this one?
Have the conversation, people. That's it.
This was a very important, very important topic.
I hope this changes somebody's mind watching or listening to this video. Like, if we could change one person's opinion on all this subject matter, our job for the rest of our podcasting careers is done, honestly. I'd be very content changing someone's opinion, but I would encourage just everyone to have this conversation with their families, have this conversation with your friends, make sure you're aware of what's going on out there.
Yeah, you have to talk about this topic. This isn't a thing that you should try to avoid because you don't want to know people's opinions on this. This is something that needs to be talked about. This is something that needs to be talked about specifically, I would say, in our country a lot. Going back to hockey, they also have a lot of international players. And some of their international, players don't experience that in their home. They don't know what to make of it here. But the history of America is intertwined with racism and with extortion and with those, dilemmas. And we can't keep running from that. You can't keep hiding that. You can't keep trying to bury that. You can't keep trying to say, well, it was a necessary evil. America is what America is, and we're the greatest country because of it, and blah, 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 blah. A conversation needs to happen. And that's pretty much the point of this, I think, is it needs to be talked about. And that's what these players are doing, more so than ever with their platform. They're getting this talked about.
Yeah. And with that, thank you for listening. We'll be back later in the week with some wrestling, and we'll get back to sports, when the time is right and what's important too. Clark, the old outro.
No, not needed. Not needed. That's it. We're done with that. No plugging nothing. Just stay tuned to episodes later this week. That's it. Nope, not plugging anything.
Great. Thanks for listening.